In the 1960s, one of the most respected Sumerian language scholars in the world sat down with CBS 10673 and did what serious academics do. He read it carefully, he translated it methodically, he documented every surviving line, and then he got to the middle of the tablet and wrote something in his analysis that has quietly unsettled researchers ever since. His name was Miguel Civil. He was a professor at the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago. The man spent his entire career studying Sumerian texts, and he was not known for drama or exaggeration. So when Civil noted in his published analysis that the lacuna in CBS 10673 almost certainly contained the resolution to destroy humanity, and possibly the reason for that resolution as well, people paid attention, because that word possibly is doing something enormous. What Civil was saying, in the careful language of a professional who had spent decades learning not to overstate things, was this: the section of the tablet that is missing is the section that contained the answer, not a partial answer, not a hint, the actual reason the gods decided to flood the earth and reset human civilization, the actual condition the 5 pre-flood cities had reached that triggered the council, the actual thing humanity had built or discovered or become that made the divine order decide the only available response was to wipe the board clean and start again. That is what sat in the missing lines, and those lines are gone. Civil could see the gap. He could measure it. He estimated roughly 34 lines of cuneiform text sitting between the founding of the 5 cities and the moment the flood decision had already been made. 34 lines, and every single one of them vanished before anyone alive today ever got to read them. That is either the worst luck in the history of archaeology, or it is something else. And this video is about which one it actually is. Let us get the physical reality of the tablet straight first, because it matters. CBS 10673 arrived at the University of Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia as part of the massive collection from the Nippur excavations of the 1890s. It did not arrive in one clean piece. It arrived as roughly the bottom third of what was originally a much larger document. The top 2/3 were already gone before the first archaeologist laid eyes on it. Nobody watched them break off. Nobody saw the upper section crumble into dust. They were simply not there when the excavators reached the tablet in the ground, which immediately raises a question that tends to get glossed over in academic treatments of this text. Where did they go? Clay does not evaporate. Clay does not dissolve. If the tablet broke naturally during the thousands of years it spent buried in the Iraqi desert, the fragments from the upper section should have been somewhere nearby, in the same room, in the same debris layer, in the same general area. The excavation records do not mention finding them, which leaves you with a small number of possibilities, and none of them are entirely comfortable. Either the upper section was destroyed long before the city collapsed around it, or it was removed deliberately at some point, or it is still somewhere in the tens of thousands of unstudied Nippur tablets that are sitting in museum collections around the world, waiting for someone to read them. And one of those possibilities is considerably more interesting than the others. Here is the structure of what actually survived, so you understand exactly where the gap sits. The tablet opens with the gods establishing civilization. Anu, Enlil, Enki, and Ninhursag, lower kingship from heaven. The 5 cities are founded: Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larag, Sippar, Shurupak, each one assigned to a deity, each one given its divine mandate and its role in the overall structure. That section survives. It is readable. Scholars have translated it. Then the gap, 34 lines, nothing. And when the text picks up again after the gap, everything has changed. The tone has shifted completely. The decision to destroy humanity is not being debated. It has already been made. Enlil has already moved to action. Enki has already decided to warn Ziusudra. The flood is already coming. The deliberation happened in the missing lines. The argument happened in the missing lines. The moment where the gods looked at what the 5 cities had become and decided the reset was necessary happened in the missing lines. Civil saw this. He understood exactly what the gap contained, and he wrote it down as carefully and precisely as a man of his training could write it. Possibly the reason. Possibly, one word, sitting in an academic footnote, describing the most important missing text in the ancient world. Now here is where it gets genuinely strange. CBS 10,000 4673 is not the only document in this tradition that is damaged in exactly the section that matters most. The Atrahasis Epic, the Akkadian text that covers the same pre-flood material from a slightly different angle, survives in fragments across multiple tablets, with significant sections missing. The Eridu Genesis, which shares material with CBS 10673, is so fragmentary that reconstructing it requires piecing together pieces from several different damaged sources. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the most famous Mesopotamian text ever found, contains the flood story in its 11th tablet. That tablet was found broken in the ruins of the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, with portions missing. Every single major text in the ancient Near East that deals with the pre-flood world and the reason for the flood is damaged. Everyone. In the sections that matter most, you can call that coincidence. 4,000 years of burial is genuinely hard on clay, and important passages are not physically protected any better than unimportant ones. That is a completely reasonable explanation, but it is also worth sitting with the fact that the scribes of Nippur were meticulous people. They copied damaged texts before they deteriorated further. They maintained archives with deliberate care. They preserved things across centuries because they understood that certain knowledge needed to outlast the people who held it. And yet the 34 lines that explained why the gods reset humanity are the 34 lines that did not make it. The Sumerian literary tradition, outside CBS 10673, gives us fragments of what the broader tradition said about the pre-flood world, and those fragments paint a picture that is not of a simple primitive society making basic mistakes. The Atrahasis Epic preserves a version of the reason for the flood that at first sounds almost funny. Humanity had become too numerous and too loud. The noise of human civilization was disturbing the gods. Enlil could not sleep, and your first instinct is to laugh at that. An all-powerful deity losing sleep because people were being noisy. But once you stop laughing and actually think about what the Sumerian scribes were describing, the noise is not literal noise. It is a threshold, a level of human activity, population, complexity, and capability that had exceeded what the divine design intended. The noise is a metaphor for a civilization that had outgrown its original parameters. And another fragment from the Eridu Genesis tradition describes the pre-flood world in terms that go further than population growth. It describes knowledge, specifically knowledge of things the gods had not given to humanity, but that humanity had acquired on its own. The Sumerians called the foundational laws and powers of civilized existence the me. Certain me were given to humanity as part of the original divine design. Others were not, and the fragments that survive from the broader pre-flood tradition suggest that by the time the council convened, the 5 cities had gotten hold of me they were never supposed to have. What exactly those were is in the 34 missing lines, and the 34 missing lines are gone. In 2021, a researcher named Jeremiah Peterson published an analysis of a small clay fragment called N3514 sitting in the Nippur collection. He was examining it as a possible candidate for filling part of the gap in CBS 10673. Think about that for a second. A scholar in 2021 was literally sitting at a desk holding a piece of 4,000-year-old clay, trying to work out whether it physically belonged to the missing section of this tablet. That is how seriously the academic world takes this gap. Peterson's conclusion was careful in the way that academic conclusions always are. The fragment does not definitively join CBS 10673. The physical connection cannot be confirmed, but the content and the position are consistent enough that it cannot be ruled out, which means there is a piece of clay somewhere in the world, possibly already catalogued under a different number in a museum collection, possibly still buried under the Iraqi desert, that may contain some portion of what Civil called possibly the reason. The gap is still open. The answer is still missing. And given the sheer volume of Nippur tablets that have never been fully studied, some of which are sitting in boxes in Philadelphia and Istanbul and London that nobody has opened in decades, the missing lines may already exist somewhere, waiting for the right person to recognize what they are holding. Here is what those 34 lines almost certainly contained, based on everything the surrounding text implies. The gods convened. They assessed what the 5 pre-flood cities had built. They measured it against whatever threshold the divine design had established. They found it had been crossed, and then the argument happened. Because the Atrahasis tradition preserves a version of that council where the gods did not all agree. Some resisted. Enki specifically objected to destroying humanity entirely. The deliberation was not a simple, unanimous decision. It was a conflict between gods who believed the reset was necessary and a god who believed it was unjust. That argument is in the missing lines. The verdict is in the missing lines. The specific capability or knowledge or condition that pushed the 5 cities past the threshold is in the missing lines. And the 34 lines that contained all of that are the 34 lines that did not survive. Miguel Civil measured the gap. He knew what was in it. He wrote about it with the precision of a man who had dedicated his life to Sumerian language and understood exactly what the absence meant, possibly the reason. One word in a footnote, describing the hole in the center of the most important ancient document about the origins and limits of human civilization. The reason the flood came is missing, and whether that is bad luck or something more deliberate is a question the tablet cannot answer, because the section that would answer it is the section that is gone. If this is the kind of history that keeps you up at night, subscribe and stay close, because the next video goes into Ziusudra, the one man who was warned, what he was actually told to carry through the reset, and why the gods gave him eternal life to do it.